A single question. That's all it took. For 17-year-old Leo, it was a question born from a lifelong passion, asked in the one place he'd dreamed of being, the cockpit of a Boeing 787. But instead of an answer, he received a blast of venom and contempt from a pilot who saw only the color of his skin. That pilot, Captain Robert Henderson, had no idea his arrogant cruelty was being directed at the beloved nephew of David Chenoweth, the powerful CEO of the very airline he flew for. He was about to learn that some insults create more than turbulence. They unleash a storm of karma that can ground a career forever. The air in the Aura Airlines first-class lounge at JFK International Airport hummed with a quiet, expensive energy. It was a symphony of clinking glasses, muted conversations, and the soft rustle of newspapers. For 17-year-old Leo, however, the only sound that mattered was the distant roar of jet engines spooling up on the tarmac outside the panoramic windows. Each takeoff was a promise, a confirmation of the dream that had captivated him since he was a boy, building model airplanes in his bedroom. Leo wasn't your typical teenager. While his friends were obsessed with video games and social media trends, Leo's world revolved around flight plans, avionics, and the graceful physics of lift and thrust. His hero wasn't a musician or an actor, but the anonymous men and women who commanded these magnificent metal birds. Today, he was closer to that world than ever before. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his uncle. Gate D24, Flight 815 to Los Angeles. Brenda Walsh, the lead purser, is expecting you. She'll get you settled and arrange the pre-flight visit. Have fun, kiddo. Wish I could be there to see your face. Call you when you land. The message was from David Chenoweth, a name that didn't mean much to the general public, but carried the weight of a titan within the aviation industry. He was the founder and CEO of Aura Airlines, a premium carrier he had built from the ground up, with a reputation for impeccable service and cutting-edge technology. To Leo, however, he was just Uncle David, the man who had fueled his passion with flight simulator software for Christmas and books on aeronautical engineering for his birthday. This trip was a special gift for his 17th birthday. Not just a first-class ticket to LA, but the golden ticket, as his uncle called it, a pre-flight visit to the flight deck of a 787 Dreamliner, a chance to talk to the pilots, to see the glass cockpit in person, to breathe the air of the command center. Leo checked his appearance in the reflection of his phone. He wore what he always wore, dark jeans, clean sneakers, and his favorite gray hoodie from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. It was comfortable, and it felt like him. He grabbed his backpack, which contained little more than a notebook, a copy of Flying Magazine, and a portable charger, and made his way to the gate. The boarding area for Flight 815 was already a hive of activity. Leo found Brenda Walsh easily. She had a warm, professional smile, and her uniform was immaculate. "You must be Leo," she said, her eyes crinkling kindly. "Mr. Chenoweth called ahead personally. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Are you excited?" "Beyond excited," Leo said, his voice brimming with genuine enthusiasm. "Thank you so much for this." "Of course. Let's get you on board before the main boarding call. We'll stow your bag, and then I'll take you up to the flight deck. Captain Henderson and his first officer are doing their final preparations." Walking down the jet bridge was like crossing a threshold into another realm. The aircraft, with its high arched ceilings and signature oversized windows, felt futuristic and serene. Brenda led him to his seat, 1A, a private pod with more buttons and features than he could count, but Leo's eyes were fixed forward toward the armored door at the front of the cabin. "All right," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ready for the main event?" Leo nodded, his heart thumping in his chest. This was it. Brenda knocked softly on the cockpit door before keying in a code. The door clicked open, revealing a space that was both smaller and more complex than any simulator could replicate. 2 men were seated, surrounded by a dizzying array of glowing screens, switches, and controls. The view through the multi-paned cockpit windows was a breathtaking panorama of the active airfield. The man in the left seat, the captain's seat, was older, with silver-grey hair and a stern set to his jaw. He had 4 stripes on his epaulets. This was Captain Robert Henderson. He glanced back, his eyes flicking over Leo's hoodie and jeans with a look of faint annoyance before turning back to a checklist. The man in the right seat, the first officer, was younger, with a friendlier face. He turned and offered a slight smile. "Hi there. Come on in, but just for a few minutes. We're on a tight schedule." Brenda gave Leo a gentle nudge. "This is Leo. He's a special guest of the airline today and a huge aviation enthusiast. Captain Henderson, First Officer Tanaka. This is Leo." First Officer Kenji Tanaka nodded. "Welcome aboard, Leo." Captain Henderson didn't turn around. He grunted, a sound of bare minimum acknowledgement. Leo stepped inside, his eyes wide with awe. He tried not to stare, to be a fly on the wall, but the questions were already bubbling up inside him. He saw the flight management system, FMS screens, displaying their route, waypoints, and performance data. He recognized the yoke, the throttle quadrant, the overhead panel. It was all here. It was all real. Leo stood respectfully behind the pilot's seats, a silent observer trying to absorb every detail. He watched as First Officer Tanaka inputted the final weight and balance figures into the FMS, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keypad. Captain Henderson was conducting his own silent scan of the instruments, his lips moving slightly as he cross-referenced his displays. The sterile, professional atmosphere was exactly what Leo had imagined, and he felt a profound sense of respect for the immense responsibility these 2 men held. He knew they were busy, and Brenda had stressed he shouldn't be a distraction, but his uncle had also encouraged him to engage, to ask intelligent questions if the opportunity arose. After a moment of silence, as Tanaka finished his input, and Henderson seemed to be at a natural pause, Leo saw his chance. He had been reading extensively about the operational differences between various long-haul aircraft, and a specific question about the Dreamliner's advanced systems had been on his mind for weeks. He decided to take the leap, his voice quiet but clear. "Excuse me, Captain Henderson." Henderson sighed, a theatrical, put-upon sound. He slowly turned his head, not his whole body, and his gaze was cold. "What is it?" Leo, slightly unnerved by the captain's frosty demeanor, pushed forward. "I was just noticing your flight plan on the navigation display. I've read that the 780 Evans FMS has an enhanced vertical situation display that can model step climbs with incredible accuracy to optimize fuel burn over long distances. I was wondering, on a transcontinental flight like this, do you typically let the system fully manage the VNRV profile, or do you manually intervene based on real-time weather data from ACARS to find a more efficient altitude, even if it deviates from the initial plan?" It was a specific, knowledgeable question. It showed genuine interest and a level of understanding far beyond that of a casual tourist. First Officer Tanaka looked back with a flicker of impressed surprise in his eyes. He opened his mouth to answer, but Henderson cut him off. The captain swiveled his chair around fully now. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, raked over Leo from head to toe. He saw the dark skin, the casual hoodie, the youthful face, and his expression curdled into one of utter disdain. He didn't see an aspiring aviator. He saw an inconvenience, an outsider who didn't belong. "Listen, kid," Henderson began, his voice laced with a condescending drawl. "We're not here to run a classroom for every wannabe who got a lucky seat upgrade. This is a multi-million-dollar machine, not a video game." Leo's face fell. The warmth of his excitement was instantly extinguished, replaced by a cold, prickling shock. I didn't mean to." "What you need to understand," Henderson continued, leaning forward as if explaining something to a toddler, "is that we fly the plane. You sit in the back and watch the movie. Simple enough for you to get?" He gestured dismissively toward the cabin. "Now, I'm sure they have some complimentary headphones for you. Why don't you go find them?" The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It wasn't just dismissive, it was demeaning, laced with an unspoken prejudice that was impossible to miss. The crack about the lucky seat upgrade and the assumption that Leo's place was in the back was a clear, targeted jab. Kenji Tanaka's face tightened. He shot a look at his captain, a silent plea to stop, but Henderson was on a roll, seemingly enjoying the power trip. Leo felt his cheeks burn with a mixture of humiliation and anger. He had been so careful, so respectful. The question was genuine. He looked from Henderson's smug face to Tanaka's uncomfortable one. The silence stretched, filled only by the low electronic hum of the cockpit. "I was just curious about the technology," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. Henderson let out a short, derisive laugh. "The technology? Son, the only technology you need to worry about is the call button at your seat if you want another soda." He turned his back on Leo, a final, brutal dismissal. "Now, if you're done, we have a job to do." The message was clear. Get out. Stunned into silence, Leo could only nod. He backed away slowly, his eyes stinging. He felt the gazes of both pilots on his back, one hostile, the other pitiful. He wasn't sure. He fumbled for the door handle, his hands suddenly clumsy. As he stepped back into the galley, the cockpit door clicked shut behind him, sealing him off from his dream, which now felt tainted and ugly. Brenda was waiting for him, her cheerful smile ready. It vanished the moment she saw his face. "Leo, what's wrong? Are you all right?" Leo couldn't find his voice. He just shook his head, the pilot's venomous words replaying in his mind. "Wannabe. Lucky seat upgrade. Sit in the back." It was the casual cruelty of it, the way Henderson had stripped him of his passion and reduced him to a stereotype in a matter of seconds, that hurt the most. He had never felt so small in his life. The walk back to seat 1A felt like a mile. Every step was heavy with humiliation. Leo sank into the plush leather, the luxurious surroundings feeling like a mockery. He stared blankly out the massive window, but the intricate ballet of ground crews and service vehicles was just a blur. Captain Henderson's words echoed in his mind, each one a fresh sting. "Sit in the back." Brenda appeared at his side a moment later, her expression deeply concerned. She knelt down so she was at his eye level. "Leo, talk to me. What happened in there?" she asked softly, placing a comforting hand on the armrest. Leo swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. "The captain, he wasn't very welcoming." He couldn't bring himself to repeat the exact words. It felt too raw, too embarrassing. "I asked a question about the flight management system, and he basically told me I was wasting his time and that I didn't belong there." Brenda's professional smile dissolved completely, replaced by a frown of genuine anger. "He said that to you?" She had seen Henderson's arrogance before. He had a reputation among the cabin crew for being gruff and imperious, but this was different. This was cruel. "Leo, that is completely unacceptable. I am so sorry." "It's okay," Leo mumbled, though it wasn't. "No, it's not okay," she insisted. "No passenger, and especially not an invited guest of Mr. Chenoweth, should ever be treated that way. That man's ego is bigger than this airplane. The main boarding process began, and a steady stream of passengers began to file past. Brenda gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "I have to get back to my duties, but we're not done with this. You just try to relax and enjoy the flight as best you can. Can I get you anything? A pre-departure orange juice? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you," Leo said, grateful for her kindness. It was a small anchor in a sea of hurt. As he sipped the water, he watched the remaining crew come aboard. He saw Captain Henderson emerge briefly from the cockpit to speak with Brenda. His posture was ramrod straight, his expression severe. He didn't even glance in Leo's direction. It was as if he had already forgotten the boy he had so casually dismissed, a non-entity not worth a second thought. The casualness of the erasure was, in some ways, worse than the insult itself. Leo pulled out his phone. His first instinct was to call his uncle and tell him everything. Uncle David would be furious. He would probably get on the satellite phone and have a word with the captain mid-flight. But Leo hesitated. What would that accomplish? It would make him look like a kid running to his powerful uncle to fight his battles. It would confirm Henderson's perception of him as a spoiled child who got a lucky upgrade. A wave of conflict washed over him. Part of him craved the immediate justice, the satisfaction of seeing Henderson put in his place. But a deeper, more mature part of him felt a strange sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about his hurt feelings. It was about something bigger. What if he wasn't the first person Captain Henderson had treated this way? What if other crew members, people without a direct line to the CEO, had been enduring his attitude for years? He decided to wait. He would observe. He would gather his thoughts and present the situation to his uncle calmly and rationally once he landed. It felt like the adult thing to do, a small act of defiance against the man who had treated him like a child. The cabin doors were closed, the jet bridge pulled away, and the safety demonstration video began to play on the screen in front of him. Soon, the massive Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 engines spooled up with their signature low hum, and the plane began its taxi to the runway. As the 787 gracefully lifted off the ground, climbing steeply into the New York sky, Leo felt none of his usual exhilaration. The joy of flight had been stolen from him. Throughout the first few hours of the journey, Leo remained quiet, nursing his drink and picking at the gourmet meal he had no appetite for. He watched Brenda and her team work. They were a model of efficiency and grace, handling the needs of the passengers with practiced smiles. He also watched them interact with the flight deck. A few times, a flight attendant would go to the cockpit with coffee or a message. Each time they came back, their professional masks were firmly in place. But Leo thought he could detect a subtle tension, a shared look of resignation. He was starting to see that Captain Henderson wasn't just a problem for him, he was a problem for the entire crew. He was a dark cloud of authority at the front of the plane, his arrogance poisoning the atmosphere for everyone. Leo's resolve hardened. This was no longer just a personal insult. It was a problem his uncle, as the CEO of Airlines, needed to know about. Not for revenge, but for the health of the company he had built. The flight continued westward, a smooth journey through the upper atmosphere. The cabin lights were dimmed, and most passengers were either asleep or engrossed in their movies. Leo had his noise-cancelling headphones on, but no sound was playing. He was simply using them to be left alone with his thoughts, staring out at the blanket of clouds below, a surreal landscape of white and grey, under a deep blue sky. About 3 hours into the flight, as they soared over the vast plains of the Midwest, Leo noticed a shift in the cabin. Brenda was speaking quietly with another flight attendant, her expression serious. A moment later, She walked up the aisle from the galley, but not towards a passenger. She stopped at an empty seat in the row behind Leo, 2A. A man who had been sitting there earlier had apparently moved. Now, another man was slipping into it. Leo paid him no mind at first, assuming it was just a passenger stretching his legs. But then the man leaned forward, tapping the shoulder of the person in the seat across the aisle. Leo caught a glimpse of his profile. He was middle-aged, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, authoritative presence. He looked vaguely familiar. Then the man turned his head slightly, and Leo's heart skipped a beat. It was his Uncle David. David Chenoweth, the CEO of Aura Airlines, was on the flight. He wasn't in a suit. He was dressed down in a polo shirt and slacks, looking like any other business traveler. He must have boarded quietly after Leo was already seated, taking a seat further back to avoid causing a fuss. His uncle caught his eye and gave him a small, warm smile before turning back to his quiet conversation. A few minutes later, the other passenger returned to his seat, and David stood up. He walked the few steps to Leo's pod and slid into the companion seat opposite him. "Thought I'd surprise you," David said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "I had a last-minute meeting in LA that I couldn't miss. Figured, why not ride along? How's the flight?" Leo was momentarily speechless, a flood of emotions swirling inside him. Relief, anxiety, validation. "Uncle David, what are you doing here?" "Business, kiddo. Always business," he said with a wink. "But the real question is, how was it? The cockpit visit. Did you geek out?" This was the moment. The carefully constructed plan to wait until they landed dissolved in the presence of his uncle. The hurt was too fresh, the anger too palpable. Leo took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "It was not what I expected," he began. David's smile faded slightly. He leaned in, his expression turning serious. "What happened?" Leo recounted the entire event. He didn't embellish or over-dramatize. He simply stated the facts, starting with his genuine excitement, repeating his question about the vertical navigation profile verbatim, and then quoting Captain Henderson's response as accurately as he could remember. He told him about the condescending tone, the dismissive laugh, the final cutting remark about needing a soda. "He called me a wannabe," Leo finished, the words tasting like ash. "He said I got a lucky seat upgrade, and that my place was in the back, watching a movie." As Leo spoke, he watched a transformation come over his uncle. The warm, familial affection in David Chenoweth's eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, something cold and hard as steel. The relaxed posture of the off-duty traveler was gone, replaced by the rigid stillness of a chief executive processing a critical failure within his organization. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly with every word Leo spoke. When Leo finished, David was silent for a long moment. He stared past Leo, out the window at the endless sky. The silence was heavier than any outburst could have been. "His name is Robert Henderson," David said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, cold and precise. "Yes," Leo confirmed. "And the first officer was Kenji Tanaka?" "Yes, he seemed uncomfortable. He didn't say anything." David nodded slowly, his mind clearly working, processing variables, calculating responses. This was no longer an uncle comforting his nephew. This was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, identifying a threat to his company's culture, its brand, and its integrity. The insult to Leo was the catalyst, but the problem, David now saw, was systemic. A captain with that attitude was a liability in countless ways. He looked back at Leo, his eyes softening for a moment. "I'm sorry, Leo. I'm truly sorry that something I intended as a special experience for you turned into this." Nobody in this company, crew or passenger, should ever be made to feel the way you did. This is not what Aura Airlines stands for." He stood up. "I need to have a quiet word with Ms. Walsh. You sit tight. We'll handle this." The word "we" hung in the air. Leo realized with a jolt that his ordeal was over. But for Captain Robert Henderson, a much more severe turbulence was just beginning. David Chenoweth didn't make a scene. His movements were discreet and purposeful. He walked to the front galley where Brenda Walsh was preparing for the next service. Passengers in the first few rows barely noticed, assuming it was a simple request for a drink. But Brenda knew better. The moment she saw the CEO's face, she knew this was serious. The hard, focused look in his eyes was one his executive board knew well. It was the look he got right before a major decision was made. "Ms. Walsh," David began, his voice low and even, "I need a moment of your time. In private." She immediately led him into the small galley area, shielded from the view of the cabin. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry about what happened to Leo before takeoff," she started, her voice filled with concern. "I saw him when he came out of the cockpit, and he was clearly upset. I tried to ask him about it, but—" David held up a hand, stopping her. "It's not your fault, Brenda, but I need you to tell me exactly what you observed. And I need to know about Captain Henderson. Not the gossip, not the rumors. Your professional experience. Has he displayed this kind of behavior before?" Brenda hesitated for only a second. The unspoken rule among airline crews was to handle conflicts internally and never to wash dirty laundry in front of management, let alone the CEO. But Leo's humiliation and the CEO's direct, serious inquiry changed the calculus. This was a moment for honesty. "Mr. Chenoweth," she said, her voice steady, "Captain Henderson is what we call old school. He's technically a very skilled pilot, no one denies that. But his command style is abrasive. He's dismissive towards cabin crew, especially junior members. He treats us more like servants than safety professionals. There have been several informal complaints among the staff, but no one has ever filed a formal report. To be honest, we're intimidated. He's a senior captain, and filing a complaint against someone like him can be career suicide." She paused, taking a breath. "I've never seen him interact with a passenger like that before. But am I surprised?" "No, sir, I'm not. The way he looked at Leo when I introduced him, it was pure contempt, as if the boy's very presence was an insult." David absorbed her words, his expression grim. "Intimidation, a culture of fear. That's what you're describing." "Yes, sir," she confirmed quietly. "Thank you, Brenda. Your honesty is appreciated, and it will be protected. I need to make a call. Is the satellite phone operational?" "Of course, sir. Right this way." David followed her to the crew station, where the aircraft's satellite communication system was located. For the next 10 minutes, he was on the phone. His conversation was quiet, almost a murmur, but the words he used were precise and laden with authority. He spoke first to Susan Pierce, his executive vice president of human resources, waking her from her sleep in New York. He laid out the situation in stark, emotionless terms. It was an on-board incident involving a senior captain and a guest that revealed a potential pattern of unprofessional conduct and a toxic command culture. He instructed her to pull Captain Henderson's complete file. Not just the official record, but everything. Commendations, complaints, even the informal ones that were noted and dismissed, flight line reports, simulator check ride notes, anything that could paint a picture of the man's temperament and history with the company. His second call was to Captain Frank Miller, Aura's chief pilot, a man David had known and trusted for 20 years. "Frank, it's David. I'm on flight 8115. I need you to meet me at the gate when we land at LAX. And I need you to come prepared to relieve a captain of his duties, pending a full investigation." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Frank Miller was a pilot's pilot. He would never take such a request lightly. David explained the situation with Leo, not as his nephew, but as a young aviation enthusiast who was a guest of the airline. He relayed Henderson's exact words. "He said that to a kid?" Frank's voice was incredulous, laced with the anger of a professional whose craft had been dishonored. "To any passenger? Unacceptable." "That's just the tip of it, Frank," David said. "Brenda Walsh, the purser, confirms a pattern of intimidating behavior. I'm flying in a toxic tube, and Henderson is the source of the poison. This ends today. I want you, me, and an HR representative on the jet bridge the moment the engines are off. No exceptions." "Understood, David. I'll be there," Frank assured him. When David finished his calls, the storm was fully gathered. On the ground in New York, an HR executive was digging into a pilot's past. In Los Angeles, the chief pilot was preparing to ground one of his own. And at 38,000 feet, Captain Robert Henderson was blissfully unaware that he was flying himself directly into the perfectly organized, career-ending hurricane his own arrogance had created. David returned to his seat near Leo. He gave his nephew a reassuring look. "It's being handled," he said simply. For the rest of the flight, a strange calm settled over the first-class cabin. Leo felt the weight lifting from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of impending justice. He wasn't happy about it, but he knew it was necessary. Across the country, invisible forces were now in motion, all converging on Gate 112 at Los Angeles International Airport. The flight was still hours from landing, but for Captain Henderson, his final descent had already begun. The familiar chime echoed through the cabin, and the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated. Captain Henderson's voice came over the PA system, a smooth, practiced baritone that betrayed none of the venom he'd shown earlier. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. We've begun our initial descent into the Los Angeles area. Weather on the ground is a beautiful 75 degrees with clear skies. We should be on the gate in approximately 25 minutes. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for flying Aura Airlines, and we hope you have a pleasant stay in Los Angeles or a safe onward journey." Leo listened to the voice, and a shiver ran down his spine. It was the voice of a man completely oblivious to his fate. He glanced at his uncle, who was staring straight ahead, his face a neutral mask. The calm before the storm. The landing was flawless. Henderson was, as Brenda had said, a technically excellent pilot. The 787 kissed the runway with barely a jolt and taxied smoothly toward the terminal. As the plane navigated the labyrinthine taxiways of LAX, David Chenoweth received a text. He read it, then put his phone away. Everything was in place. The aircraft finally docked at the gate, and the powerful engine spooled down into silence. The usual flurry of activity began as passengers unbuckled their belts and began retrieving their bags from the overhead bins. Leo and his uncle remained seated. Brenda's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Los Angeles. Please remain seated until the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. We'd like to thank you once again for flying with us." A moment later, the sign went off. But then, a second, unusual announcement followed. "Captain Henderson and First Officer Tanaka, please remain on the flight deck until all passengers have deplaned. A company representative needs to speak with you." This was not standard procedure. Leo saw Brenda give a quick, knowing glance toward his uncle. In the cockpit, Henderson would likely be annoyed at the delay, assuming it was some minor operational issue. Leo and David waited patiently as the first-class cabin emptied, followed by the rest of the passengers. The cleaning crew was held at the gate, an order relayed discreetly by the gate agent. Soon, only Leo, David, and the cabin crew remained on the silent aircraft. "Leo, why don't you wait for me right here?" David said, his voice calm. "This won't take long." David stood up and walked to the front of the aircraft, just as the jet bridge door opened. 3 figures stepped on board. The first was Captain Frank Miller, the chief pilot, his face grim, his own 4-stripe epaulets seeming to carry far more weight than Henderson's. Behind him was a sharp-looking woman in a business suit, whom Leo assumed was the HR representative, Susan Pierce. The third was the airport's Aura Airlines station manager. Without a word, David led the trio to the cockpit door. He didn't knock. He keyed in the access code himself. Inside the cockpit, Henderson and Tanaka were finishing their shutdown checklist. Henderson looked up, irritation flashing across his face as the door opened. "What is this? We've got a short turnaround time," he snapped. Then he saw who was standing there. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized Frank Miller. Then they fell on David Chenoweth. His arrogance faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He didn't recognize his own CEO, who rarely flew in uniform and kept a low public profile. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Henderson asked, his tone shifting from irritated to cautiously authoritative. Frank Miller stepped forward, his presence filling the small space. "Bob, this is David Chenoweth, our CEO, and Susan Pierce from HR." Henderson's face went pale. The blood seemed to drain from it in an instant. He visibly swallowed, his eyes darting from David to Frank and back again. "Mr. Chenoweth, sir, this is an honor. I had no idea you were on board." David's expression remained unreadable, his voice devoid of emotion. "Clearly. Captain Henderson, First Officer Tanaka, please put down your checklists. We need to discuss an incident that occurred before takeoff in New York." Henderson's mind was clearly racing, trying to recall any procedural error. "An incident, sir?" The departure was nominal. Everything was by the book. "This wasn't a procedural issue, Captain," David said, his voice dropping a decibel, yet gaining intensity. "It was a personnel issue. It concerns a guest of the airline, a young man who you hosted on this flight deck for a pre-flight visit." A flash of recognition, followed immediately by dismissal, crossed Henderson's face. "Oh, the kid. He was a bit of a distraction, asking a lot of technical questions. I politely asked him to return to his seat so we could complete our preparations." David's gaze was like ice. "Politely? Is that what you call it? Let me refresh your memory. My nephew asked you an intelligent question about this aircraft's VNA system. In response, you called him a wannabe, accused him of getting a lucky seat upgrade, and told him his place was in the back watching a movie. Is that your definition of politeness, Captain?" He paused, letting the words hang in the stunned silence of the cockpit. "Did I miss anything?" Henderson was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The smug, arrogant pilot had vanished, replaced by a terrified man who finally understood the colossal scale of his misjudgment. His eyes darted to Leo, who was now visible standing in the galley, and the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The kid in the hoodie wasn't just a guest. He was family. The CEO's family. "First Officer Tanaka," David said, turning his attention to the man in the right seat. Kenji had been sitting frozen, a statue of professional anxiety. "I have one question for you. Is my nephew's account of Captain Henderson's words accurate?" Kenji Tanaka looked at his captain, the man who held his career in his hands. He then looked at the CIO, the chief pilot, and the head of HR. He saw Leo standing just outside the door, the look of quiet hurt still visible on his face. This was a crossroads. He could lie or obfuscate to protect his captain, or he could tell the truth. He took a breath. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It is completely accurate. Word for word." The confirmation landed like a hammer blow. Henderson visibly sagged in his seat, the last of his bravado evaporating. He knew it was over. The cockpit, once a sanctuary of professional calm and a symbol of Leo's highest aspirations, had transformed into a silent, suffocating tribunal. The array of dark screens and dormant instruments seemed to stand as silent witnesses. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the ground power unit, a monotonous drone that amplified the crushing weight of the moment. Robert Henderson remained frozen in the captain's seat, the fabric of his perfectly pressed uniform suddenly looking like a costume he was no longer worthy of wearing. Susan Pierce, the HR executive, stepped forward into the tight space, her presence sharp and commanding. She held a tablet, its screen glowing with the digital ghost of Henderson's career. Her voice, when she spoke, was not accusatory or emotional. It was clinical, precise, and all the more devastating for it. "Captain Henderson," she began, her gaze unwavering, "we pulled your complete file an hour ago. Your technical record, your simulator checks, your flight reviews, is, as expected, exemplary. You are a master of the machine. However, your personnel record tells a very different story. A story of a man who commands with fear, not respect." Henderson flinched as if struck. Susan didn't relent. "In the last 5 years, there have been 7 informal complaints logged by cabin crew leads. These were never escalated because the staff members who reported them were afraid of retaliation. They mention your demeaning tone, your unprofessional attitude, and a habit of dismissing legitimate safety concerns from the cabin as hysteria. One report from Purser Brenda Walsh 2 years ago noted you berated a junior flight attendant in front of passengers for being 2 minutes late with your coffee." She swiped the screen. "Furthermore, 2 separate junior first officers filed transfer requests to move off your crew rotation within 6 months of being assigned to you. One cited a hostile work environment where questions are treated as insubordination. The other simply stated personal reasons, but his performance reviews show a marked decline in confidence during his time flying with you, a decline that reversed the moment he was reassigned." Henderson started to speak, a weak protest forming on his lips. "Those were misunderstandings, standard flight deck pressures." Susan's eyes narrowed, cutting him off. "Was it standard pressure when a flight dispatcher in Chicago noted in an official report last year that you used, and I quote, unnecessarily abusive and profane language during a discussion about a weather-related rerouting? He claims you questioned his intelligence and threatened to file a complaint against him for doing his job. In each of these instances, Captain, these issues were handled with a quiet verbal warning and another note buried in your file. The system allowed you to continue because you fly the plane well, and no one was brave enough to risk their career to formally challenge you." She paused, letting the weight of the documented pattern settle in the stale cockpit air. "It seems you've cultivated a command where your crew is more afraid of you than of any in-flight emergency. That is not leadership, and that is not the Aura Airlines way." The condemnation from HR was brutal, but the words from Captain Frank Miller, the chief pilot, were what truly cut to the bone. Frank stepped forward, his face etched with the profound disappointment of a leader let down by one of his most senior men. He looked less at Henderson and more at the 4 stripes on his shoulders, as if addressing the rank itself. "Bob," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of regret. "We're a small community in this profession. We trust each other with our lives. We put these stripes on your shoulder, and with them, we hand you the ultimate trust. Trust with a $500 million asset. Trust with hundreds of souls in the back. And trust with the reputation of every other pilot who wears this uniform. That trust isn't just about your ability to handle a crosswind landing. It's about judgment. It's about character. It's about leading a team of professionals with dignity. He finally met Henderson's desperate gaze. You sat in this seat, a seat that kids dream of, and you looked at a guest, a young man filled with passion for what we do, and you judged him. You saw his clothes and the color of his skin, and you decided he was worthless. You used the power of this seat not to inspire, but to wound. What you did was not just an insult to him. It was a betrayal of the uniform. You've dishonored all of us today, Bob. The dam of Henderson's composure finally broke. Panic, raw and undisguised, flooded his face. He swiveled in his chair, his eyes pleading, no longer looking at the CEO but at the man he saw as a fellow aviator. "Frank, please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "It was a mistake. One mistake. I was stressed. The schedule was tight. I had things on my mind. You know what it's like?" He then turned to David Chenoweth, his voice rising in desperation. "David." "Mr. Chenoweth, I am so sorry. I was out of line. It was a lapse in judgment, that's all. I can apologize to the boy. I will apologize." He looked past them, toward the galley where Leo stood, a silent observer to the demolition of a man's life. "I am so sorry. Please, don't do this. This job, it's my whole life." His apology was a raw, pathetic thing, born not of remorse for his actions, but of terror at their consequences. It was the plea of a man who was caught, not of a man who had seen the error of his ways. David Chenoweth listened to the desperate appeal without a flicker of change in his expression. When Henderson finished, the CEO took a deliberate step forward, his quiet presence dominating the confined space. "Robert, your apology is irrelevant," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "It is also 5 hours and 3,000 miles too late. This isn't about my nephew anymore. He was simply the unlucky person who happened to be standing in the path of a sickness that you have been spreading within my company for years. He was the catalyst that exposed the rot." David gestured around the cockpit. "You said you were stressed, that it was a bad day. Let me be clear. Hundreds of people on this aircraft are having a day. Some are flying to a funeral, some to a wedding. Some are terrified of flying. Others are exhausted from business trips. The crew in the back have been on their feet for hours, dealing with every possible demand with a smile. Your job, your privilege, as commander of this vessel, is to be the calm at the center of it all. You are the one person who does not get to have a bad day that spills onto others. You abused that privilege." He let the words sink in before delivering the final verdict. "We don't sell seats, Captain. We sell trust. The trust that our passengers will be safe and that they will be treated with respect. You have proven yourself to be a liability to both. Your actions today have made it clear that your judgment cannot be trusted. Therefore, you will not be trusted with an Aura Airlines aircraft ever again." David looked past him to Frank Miller, a silent command passing between them. "Captain Henderson, as of this moment, you are relieved of duty. You are suspended, pending termination. Captain Miller will escort you from the aircraft. You will leave your company ID, your cockpit access keys, and all other property with him right now. You will not fly for Aura Airlines again." The finality of the statement was absolute. There was no appeal, no negotiation. Henderson stared blankly, his face ashen. The fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. The life he had known, the identity that had defined him, was over. Slowly, as if his hands were made of lead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, removing the laminated ID card. He unclipped the keys from his belt. He placed them on the center console with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent cockpit. Frank Miller put a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder. "Let's go, Bob." Like a man in a trance, Robert Henderson stood up. He didn't look at anyone. He stared at the floor as he was led out of the cockpit, a ghost in a pilot's uniform. Leo watched him walk past, a man suddenly stripped of all his authority, his arrogant posture replaced by a defeated slump. He saw him walk down the empty jet bridge, a lonely figure disappearing from view, his career in ashes behind him. After he was gone, David turned to First Officer Tanaka, whose face was a mixture of shock and profound relief. "Kenji," David said, his tone softening considerably. "You were put in an impossible position today. It takes courage to speak the truth in the face of a superior. You showed that courage. I appreciate it, and it will be remembered." "Thank you, sir," Kenji breathed out, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "To be honest, it's been difficult flying with him for a while." "Then let's make sure your next rotations are with captains who lead by example," David replied. "You'll be flying back to JFK with Captain Miller in the morning. Take the night off. You've earned it." Finally, David walked out of the cockpit and over to Leo. The cold CEO persona dissolved, and he was once again just Uncle David. He put a strong, comforting hand on his nephew's shoulder. "You okay?" Leo nodded, the whirlwind of emotions finally beginning to settle. He didn't feel the triumphant joy of revenge. He felt the profound gravity of the moment, a sobering lesson in consequence and character. "Yeah," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "I'm okay." "What you did today was important," David said, his voice filled with pride. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You spoke up for every flight attendant he ever belittled, for every co-pilot he ever intimidated. Because you told the truth, a problem that has been hurting good people in this company for years has finally been dealt with. You showed more character at 17 than that man has shown in 30 years of flying." David looked around the magnificent empty cabin of the Dreamliner. "This is your dream, Leo. Don't let one bitter man and his ugly words tarnish it. Let him be a lesson. Let this entire day be a lesson. Command isn't about the stripes on your shoulder or the power you hold. It's about how you treat people when you have that power. When you're sitting in that left seat one day, you'll remember this, and you'll know exactly the kind of pilot you never want to become." The words resonated deep within Leo's soul. His passion for aviation hadn't been broken. It had been forged into something stronger. It was now tempered with a new, profound understanding of responsibility, leadership, and the simple, non-negotiable importance of treating every single person with dignity. His dream was no longer just about the thrill of flying the machine. It was about the honor of deserving the command. So what's the takeaway from this incredible story of arrogance and consequence? It's a powerful, real-world reminder that prejudice and disrespect have no place in our society, whether it's at 38,000 feet or on solid ground. Captain Henderson's career wasn't destroyed by a single mistake, but by a pattern of behavior born from a bitter heart. And it took one brave teenager to finally bring it into the light. The karma he received wasn't just about being fired. It was about being held accountable for the poison he spread. This story shows that in the end, character is just as important as skill, and integrity will always fly higher than ego. Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of power abuse it so flagrantly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true stories of drama and karmic justice. Your support helps us keep telling these important stories. Thank you for listening.